Our planet is a beautiful tapestry of interconnected life. Every plant and every animal has its place, a home where it has evolved over millions of years to live in harmony with its surroundings. This delicate balance is what sustains our world's incredible biodiversity. But what happens when a species is taken from its native home and introduced to a new land? Sometimes, without the natural predators or diseases that kept it in check, it can multiply uncontrollably. These are known as invasive species, and they represent one of the greatest threats to nature today. They are a living reminder of how human actions can have far-reaching and unintended consequences for the natural world. It is a story that has unfolded across the globe, on every continent and in every ocean. People have always moved animals around, sometimes for food, sometimes for work, and sometimes simply as a reminder of home. For centuries, these introductions were often made with the best of intentions. Settlers in new lands sought to bring a piece of their old world with them, to make the unfamiliar landscape feel more like home. They could not have foreseen the ecological disruption that would follow. These animals, finding themselves in a land of plenty with few threats, began a silent invasion that would change ecosystems forever, pushing native species towards the brink. This is not just a story about animals, it is a story about the health of our planet and our own well-being. Invasive species can damage the land we rely on for farming, costing billions of dollars in lost crops and control efforts. They can contaminate our water sources and spread diseases to both livestock and people. They disrupt the intricate web of life that supports everything from the smallest insect to the largest mammal. Understanding this challenge is the first step towards finding solutions and learning to live more carefully on this shared planet, protecting the fragile balance that we all depend upon. The tales of these invasions are cautionary ones, filled with lessons we are still learning. They show us the remarkable adaptability of life, but also the profound vulnerability of established ecosystems. From the rugged outback of Australia to the bustling suburbs of the United States, the problem is real and it is growing. By looking closely at the stories of specific animals, like the wild goats of Australia or the geese of North America, we can begin to grasp the true scale of the issue. It is a complex problem, but one that we must face if we are to preserve the natural wonders of our world for future generations. Australia is a land like no other. Separated from other continents for millions of years, it became a unique evolutionary laboratory. Its wildlife is famous the world over, from kangaroos and koalas to wombats and wallabies. These animals evolved in isolation, perfectly adapted to the continent's harsh and unpredictable climate. But this isolation also left them incredibly vulnerable. When European settlers arrived from 1788 onwards, they did not come alone. They brought with them a host of animals that were completely alien to this ancient land. And in doing so, they unwittingly opened a Pandora's box of ecological problems that continue to this day. The list of introduced species is long and troublesome. Rabbits, brought for sport and a taste of home, soon swarmed across the landscape in biblical plagues. Red foxes, introduced to hunt the rabbits, instead found Australia's small, slow-moving marsupials to be much easier prey. Wild boars or feral pigs escaped from farmyards and spread rapidly, tearing up delicate wetlands and farmlands with their powerful snouts. These animals were not inherently bad, they were simply in the wrong place. In their native lands, their numbers were controlled by predators, competition, and disease. In Australia, they found a paradise with few of these natural limits. The reasons for their introduction were varied. Camels were brought in the 19th century to help explore and build infrastructure in the vast arid interior, chosen for their incredible endurance. Goats were brought aboard the very first ships as a reliable source of milk and meat for the fledgling colonies. These were practical decisions made by people trying to survive and build a new society in a challenging environment. No one could have predicted that these hardy survivors would one day break free from human control and establish massive wild populations that would threaten the very fabric of the Australian bush. The process of invasion was often gradual. A few animals would escape from a farm, or they might be deliberately released into the wild when they were no longer needed. With vast open spaces and an abundance of food, their populations began to grow. First slowly, then with astonishing speed. They outcompeted native animals for food and water, destroyed their habitats, and spread unfamiliar diseases. The arrival of these new animals began to unravel the delicate ecological web that had taken millennia to weave, creating a profound and lasting challenge for the continent. Among Australia's most successful invaders is the feral goat. These animals first arrived with the First Fleet in 1788, brought as a walking larder to provide fresh milk and meat for the early settlers. They were tough, adaptable, and easy to manage, making them ideal livestock for a new colony. Over the next century, more goats were introduced by sailors, miners, and railway workers who would release them as a future food source. Some simply escaped from farms, their natural hardiness and intelligence allowing them to easily fend for themselves in the wild Australian bush. These escaped and released goats found Australia to be a land of opportunity. They are not picky eaters, consuming a wide variety of grasses, shrubs, and trees. This allows them to thrive in diverse environments, from the wet forests of the east to the arid, rocky rangelands of the west. Today, it is estimated that a feral goat population of over 2.3 million roams across nearly one-third of the continent. During favorable wet seasons, their numbers can explode rapidly, as they can breed year-round and often give birth to twins. Their population is a testament to their incredible resilience. The damage caused by these vast herds is immense. Goats graze on native vegetation with devastating efficiency, stripping landscapes bare and preventing young trees and shrubs from regenerating. This leads to severe soil erosion, as the loss of plant cover leaves the ground exposed to wind and rain. They foul precious waterholes, a critical resource for native wildlife in dry regions. By competing for food and shelter, they place immense pressure on native animals like the yellow-footed rock wallaby, which is now an endangered species, partly due to competition from feral goats. The economic cost to farmers is also significant, with goats competing with sheep and cattle for pasture. Furthermore, feral goats are carriers of diseases that can be transmitted to domestic livestock. This poses a constant threat to Australia's agricultural industries. They can spread diseases like foot and mouth if it were ever to enter the country, which would be catastrophic for the nation's economy. The total annual cost of feral goats through lost agricultural production and management expenses is estimated to be over 25 million Australian dollars. They are a constant moving problem that degrades the natural environment and undermines the livelihoods of those who work the land, a true legacy of an introduction made with very different hopes. Faced with the relentless spread of feral goats, Australians have developed several methods to try and control their numbers and reduce their impact. These strategies range from commercial harvesting to government-led culling programs, each with its own set of challenges and benefits. One of the most common methods is commercial mustering, where contractors use helicopters or motorbikes to herd large groups of goats together. These captured goats are then transported to processing facilities, where they are sold for meat, supplying a growing export market. This approach turns a pest into a valuable resource, creating an economic incentive for their removal. Another key strategy is ground and aerial shooting. In remote or rugged terrain where mustering is impractical, trained professionals in helicopters or on the ground carry out culling programs. These operations are often funded by government agencies and are carefully planned to be as effective and humane as possible. This method is particularly useful for rapidly reducing goat populations in environmentally sensitive areas, such as national parks or the habitats of endangered species. It is a direct and often necessary intervention to protect fragile ecosystems from the intense grazing pressure exerted by large goat herds. Trapping is also used, particularly around watering points. In Australia's dry landscapes, water is a powerful lure. Fences are built around dams and waterholes with specially designed gates that allow goats to enter, but not to leave. Once a sufficient number of animals are trapped, they can be removed. This method is less disruptive to the landscape than large-scale mustering and can be highly effective in arid regions. Sometimes a Judas goat is used, a single goat fitted with a radio collar which is then released to join a wild herd. The herd can then be easily located and removed by tracking the collared animal. Despite these efforts, managing feral goats remains a continuous and costly battle. No single method is a perfect solution, and a combination of strategies is usually required. The goat's ability to breed quickly means that populations can rebound rapidly if control efforts are not sustained. Exclusion fencing is also becoming more common, with land managers building special fences to keep goats out of high-value conservation areas or farming properties. This is an expensive but effective long-term solution. The challenge is immense, requiring constant vigilance and investment to protect Australia's unique natural heritage from these hardy survivors. The story of the camel in Australia is one of remarkable irony. They were first brought to the continent in the 1840s to be the ultimate tool of exploration and transport. These ships of the desert, primarily dromedary camels with a single hump, were perfectly suited to the vast, waterless expanses of the Australian interior. They were instrumental in the construction of major projects like the Overland Telegraph Line and the Trans-Australian Railway. For over half a century, camels and their handlers, known as cameleers, who came from places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, were the backbone of transport in the outback. However, the arrival of motorized vehicles in the 1920s and 30s made the camel redundant almost overnight. No longer needed for work, thousands of camels were simply released into the wild. It was a decision made out of convenience, but it would have enormous ecological consequences. The camels, already perfectly adapted to arid conditions, found the Australian outback to be an ideal new home. They faced no natural predators and were free from the diseases that affected them in their native lands of Asia and the Middle East. Their population began to grow, unchecked and unnoticed for many decades. By the early 2000s, Australia had a shocking realization. It was home to the largest wild camel population on Earth. At its peak, the number was estimated to be over 1 million, roaming across 3.3 million square kilometers of Western Australia, South Australia, Queensland, and the Northern Territory. These herds, sometimes numbering in the thousands, began to cause significant problems. A single camel can drink up to 200 liters of water in just a few minutes, and during times of drought, vast herds would descend upon remote communities and cattle stations, draining water supplies and destroying infrastructure like fences, pipes, and water pumps. The environmental damage caused by these gentle giants is substantial. They are heavy animals that trample native vegetation and foul sacred waterholes, which are culturally and ecologically vital for indigenous communities and native wildlife. Their grazing habits also alter the plant life of the desert, and they can cause millions of dollars in damage to pastoral properties each year. The cost of managing this enormous population became a pressing issue for the Australian government, leading to one of the largest and most ambitious animal control programs ever undertaken in the country. As the wild camel population swelled to over 1 million by 2009, the Australian government recognized that a drastic and coordinated response was necessary. The damage to remote infrastructure, cultural sites, and fragile desert ecosystems was becoming, well, unsustainable. In response, the Australian Feral Camel Management Project was launched, a 4-year, $19 million program that represented the most significant effort to control an invasive species in the nation's history. Its primary goal was to dramatically reduce the camel population across the vast rangelands of Central Australia through a combination of aerial culling and commercial harvesting. The main method employed was aerial culling from helicopters. This involved highly skilled marksmen shooting camels in remote areas that were inaccessible by land. While confronting, this method was considered the most humane and effective way to manage large numbers of animals spread over such an immense area. The operations were carefully planned to target large herds, especially during dry seasons when they would gather around water sources. It was a difficult task, both logistically and emotionally, but it was seen as essential to protect the environment and the livelihoods of people living in the outback. Alongside the culling, efforts were made to expand the commercial use of camels. This involved mustering wild camels and selling them for meat, both for domestic consumption and for export to markets in the Middle East and Europe. Some camels were also captured for the live export trade or for domestic use in tourism. However, the sheer scale of the wild population and the remoteness of their habitat meant that commercial operations alone could not solve the problem. The costs of capturing and transporting camels from the deep outback were often just too high to be economically viable on a large enough scale. By the time the project concluded in 2013, it was estimated that over 160,000 camels had been removed. This significantly reduced the pressure on the environment and brought the population down to a more manageable level of around 300,000. Today, management continues through smaller-scale programs run by state governments and landholders. The Great Camel Cull was a controversial but necessary chapter in Australia's ongoing struggle with invasive species. It highlighted the extreme measures that are sometimes required to correct the ecological mistakes of the past and protect the continent's unique natural heritage. The challenge of invasive species is not unique to Australia. Thousands of miles away, across the Pacific Ocean, the United States faces its own set of ecological battles with animals that have been introduced to a new world. The story is strikingly similar. Species brought for food, sport, or by accident have escaped into the wild and established thriving populations. These animals disrupt ecosystems, cause economic damage, and create new challenges for wildlife managers and private citizens alike. The list of invaders is long and varied, reflecting the country's diverse landscapes and history of settlement. In the southern states, wild boars, descendants of domestic pigs brought by early Spanish explorers, roam the forests and farmlands. They cause billions of dollars in damage to agriculture each year by rooting up crops and pastures. In Louisiana, large rodents known as nutria or swamp rats, introduced for their fur, have destroyed vast areas of coastal wetlands, increasing the vulnerability of the coastline to storms. In the West, hundreds of thousands of wild horses and burros, descendants of animals that escaped from miners and ranchers, compete with native wildlife for scarce water and forage in arid landscapes. Other familiar animals have also become problematic. White-tailed deer populations have exploded in many suburban areas, leading to an increase in car accidents and the destruction of gardens and natural vegetation. Coyotes, once confined to the West, have cleverly adapted to urban environments and can now be found in cities across the country. Beavers and raccoons, while native to North America, have also seen their populations grow in human-dominated landscapes, often leading to conflicts as they build dams that cause flooding or raid bins for food. Each of these species presents a unique management puzzle. Among the most visible and widespread of these invasive species is one that many people might not even consider a problem: the Canada goose. This large, distinctive bird has become a ubiquitous sight in parks, on golf courses, and near lakes and ponds across the United States. Once a symbol of the wild, migrating long distances each year, a huge population of these geese no longer bothers to leave. They have adapted perfectly to our manicured landscapes, and their growing numbers have turned them from a welcome visitor into a significant nuisance in many communities. The Canada goose is a true North American success story, perhaps too much of a success. In the early 20th century, certain populations were hunted so heavily that they were thought to be near extinction. Conservation efforts were put in place to help them recover, and they worked incredibly well. At the same time, humans began creating the perfect goose habitat across the country: sprawling lawns in suburban parks, corporate campuses, and golf courses, often situated right next to ponds or lakes. These areas provide a perfect combination of tender grass for food, open water for safety, and a clear line of sight to spot any potential predators. As a result, a massive population of resident geese has established itself. These are geese that do not migrate to the Canadian Arctic for the summer, but instead live year-round in the same location in the United States. They breed prolifically, with a single pair producing a new clutch of goslings each spring. Without the stresses of long-distance migration, their survival rates are high. The resident Canada goose population is now estimated to be well over 3 million birds. They have become so accustomed to humans that they show little fear, creating a host of problems for the people they live alongside. The most obvious problem is their droppings. A single goose can produce up to 1.5 pounds of feces every day. When hundreds of geese gather in one place, they can quickly turn parks, beaches, and sports fields into unsanitary messes. Their droppings pollute waterways with excess nutrients and bacteria, which can lead to algae blooms and make swimming areas unsafe. Their aggressive grazing can destroy lawns and crops, and they can become quite territorial and aggressive during their nesting season in the spring, sometimes chasing or charging at people who come too close to their nests. Furthermore, large flocks of geese pose a serious threat to aviation. A collision between a goose and an airplane can have catastrophic consequences, as famously demonstrated by the Miracle on the Hudson incident in 2009. To manage these risks and nuisances, a variety of control methods are used. These range from non-lethal techniques like using dogs to chase geese away, installing fences or modifying habitats to make them less attractive, to more direct population control measures like egg addling, preventing eggs from hatching, or organized culls in areas where the population is dangerously high. It is a complex issue of balancing wildlife management with public safety and convenience. The stories of Australia's wild goats and camels and America's Canada geese tell a similar tale. They are powerful examples of how human actions, even those with good intentions, can profoundly disrupt the natural balance of an ecosystem. These animals are not villains. They are survivors, masterfully adapting to new environments. The problem arises because these new environments are not adapted for them. Their success often comes at a great cost to the native plants and animals that have evolved over millennia, and to the people who rely on the land for their livelihoods and well-being. Managing these invasive species is a complex and ongoing responsibility for both nations. It requires significant scientific research, public funding, and the cooperation of governments, farmers, and the general public. There are no easy solutions. Culling programs can be controversial, commercialization is not always viable, and non-lethal methods are often only temporary fixes. Yet the cost of inaction is far greater. Allowing these populations to grow unchecked would lead to irreversible damage to biodiversity, further degradation of agricultural land, and increased risks to public health and safety. Protecting our native worlds is about more than just saving individual species from extinction. It is about preserving the health and resilience of entire ecosystems. Healthy ecosystems provide us with clean air and water, fertile soil for our food, and natural spaces for recreation and inspiration. Invasive species weaken these systems, making them more vulnerable to other threats like climate change and pollution. By controlling invasive populations, we are not just managing a pest. We are actively restoring and safeguarding the natural infrastructure that supports all life, including our own. Ultimately, the challenge of invasive species teaches us a vital lesson in humility and foresight. It reminds us that every corner of our planet is part of an intricate web, and that pulling on one thread can have unforeseen consequences elsewhere. For both Australia and the United States, the path forward involves a continued commitment to managing the problems of the past and, crucially, preventing new ones from occurring. It is a shared responsibility to be better stewards of our planet, ensuring that the unique, natural heritage of each continent can be preserved for the generations yet to come.